Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloudbase Mayhem. This is maybe one of the most enjoyable conversations I've had. They've all been amazing, but Kevin Brooker reached out to me months ago. He's not a paraglider, he's a sailplane pilot, and he had been told about the podcast and got really hooked on it and has been enjoying it. And he and I got into a talk about wave, and some of the things I said weren't quite correct. And so he's filled me in on that, and then he's just made me completely infatuated with sailplanes. The stuff these guys are doing down in the Andes, flying so far, they're running out of continent. Just recently, the altitude record was broken, which had held for more than 20 years. I think in the late 80s, a guy named Bob Harris went to 48 or 49,000, and they just broke that. They went to 52,000. So in this episode, we talk about wave a lot, and we talk about what these guys are doing, and oxygen, and the Perlan project where they're trying to get to 100,000, which is pretty far out there type of stuff. It's got a bunch of backing from Airbus, and Steve Fawcett was involved in that before he died. Anyway, this is just fascinating. If you fly, whatever aircraft you fly, you're going to really dig this. This is super fun. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into it. I want to remind everybody that Miguel Gutierrez and the Alas del Hombre team has the pre-paragliding World Cup, and the race director is Jockey Sanderson, which you've all heard on. You've heard him on the podcast. Legend, SIV instructor and pilot, and ozone test pilot and stuff. That's December 2nd through the 9th down in Jalisco, Mexico. The website is pwcamexico.com. Highly recommend you sign up for that. This is just going to be an awesome comp. I'll be down there for that and the Monarca, and I believe when you sign up right now, you can sign up for both comps for $400, which is just ridiculous. So check that out. I said that in the last podcast, but I just want to bring it home and make sure those of you who have flying plans this winter, please include that comp in your plans. It's going to be amazing. It'll be really cool to fly a new site. Usually we're going down to Valle, which is also awesome, but this will be exciting, fun, and great mentoring programs going on. And I think for those of you who haven't flown a lot of comps, this is a great way to get access to a really solid group of pilots and a great comp. So check that out. And let's get into it. Please enjoy this conversation with Kevin Brooker, all about wave and getting super tall and flying really, really far, and how you can use that to increase your own flights in hang gliding or paragliding, whatever it is. We get into SKU-T diagrams and forecasting and how to pee when you're on really, really long flights. Lots of just awesome material here. I think you're going to enjoy it. So let's get into it. Kevin, I am so stoked to talk to you, man. I've been really appreciating your emails over the months, and I know you got in touch with Matt Wilkes after the podcast with him, the ER doc we talked to out in the UK, and really appreciate what you guys are doing with him with this high altitude stuff. That is super cool. But welcome to the Mayhem. I can't wait to talk to you about sailplanes. I think you're the first completely non-paraglider we've had on the show, and it just thrills me to no end that you listen to the podcast and you're digging it and enjoying the topic. But I think we can learn a lot from you. So thanks for coming out, and thanks for coming on the show. And why don't we start off with before we started recording there, you were giving me a kind of a brief history lesson in sailplanes. Why don't we start there? I've got a million questions for you, but when did it start and where is it now? Can you kind of take us through the quick resume of sailplane flying?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. I'll do my best. I don't have all the names and dates and things like that down. But, before we get started with that, though, it's been really fun working and listening to the Mayhem. It's awesome. I found it by accident when I was looking for single skin power kites, and stumbled into it and somebody said it was on the Mayhem. And I was like, okay, cool. And looked it up and got totally hooked on everything you're talking about. And as you mentioned, I've never even seen a paraglider. I mean, if you're looking for gas, not scraping the bottom of the barrel, you're going under the barrel for this one. But it's it, it's awesome. And I've learned a ton. I love listening to the mindset of everybody. That's what's been the most fascinating because, I'm also a pilot, and the mindset of, how do you do well? How do you get better? And things that all the people on the Mayhem talk about is absolutely fascinating. And I pushed it around to some other friends of mine who are trying to improve. And so it's great. I'm honored to be here, man. So I'll see if we can make it worthwhile for guys to listen to. But so the history of sailplanes, I mean, they first off started with gliders, and really gliding is just like the sled ride when you guys, bombing out or whatever the term is, you're just going down, you can't go back up. And so I think they first started soaring like sailplanes was probably in the teens and the 20s, after the powered airplane was there, when they figured out they could start using different kinds of lift. And I have a book that was printed in the 20s. It's a little pamphlet. It talks about it, and really briefly. It was a translation from German. It was pretty neat. But so in the beginning, they were all made out of wooden fabric and steel, and they were just like big kites, really. But they could control them, which was really cool. And the sport really took off after World War I. Because all of the treaties, they wouldn't allow the Germans to have powered airplanes. So they really invested a lot of energy and effort into building sailplanes. And that's what really drove this sport forward. And it stayed that way, I'm going to guess, till about the mid 60s, when the advent of fiberglass came along, and it allowed them to build more complicated shapes and things that were more aerodynamic and experiment with airfoils. And they really started pushing, longer and longer and longer flights. And then up through the 70s, again, they started exploring even more, and a lot of ridge flights were made down in the Appalachian ridges in Pennsylvania. And they, that's where they were, making 1,000K flights and stuff, and really pushing it along. In about the mid 80s, they started working towards pilot comfort. Until then, they were looking for performance at a little bit of expense of the pilot. And then somebody realized, hey, if the pilot's putting less energy into flying and is more comfortable, they can think more about what's going on. And again, they made some more advances just in ergonomics. And I think the biggest advance lately has been carbon fiber. It allowed them to build thinner wings so they have less drag and still make, interesting airfoils, and they would stay together, and they're a lot lighter. You put together a sailplane from the 70s, and it's you're hoping you don't have a hernia. And the latest gliders, even with 18-meter wings, you can put them together. Two guys can put them together easily without a whole lot of grunting and groaning. So it's that's a quick history of the development of the sailplane. We could go on for podcasts talking about the minutia of it, but it's really been fascinating. And it's been fun. There's a lot of the older sailplanes around. They're really fun to fly. I mean, our club, the Post Mill Soaring Club here in Vermont, has an old Schweitzer 233, which is the ubiquitous trainer. It's it doesn't do anything great, but it doesn't do anything bad. And just about every sailplane pilot in the U.S. has time in one of them. It's it's like the Piper Cub of the sailplane world. So it's pretty neat that it's going along now.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Talk to me about limits. You said 18-meter wings. So, is it just going to keep getting lighter and better glide? Or are you, we laugh about it in paragliding because we thought we'd reach the apex back in the mid 90s, and they just keep getting better and better. What does the horizon look like? What can you guys fly in?
In terms of weather, or in terms of
how
what the ships
tough
are
are
doing?
these things? I mean, how much wind can you fly in? How much turbulence? I imagine as you just get more and more spanny, kind of like the really high end hang gliders, they get quite a bit more difficult to fly, right?
Yeah, I mean, the larger wingspan, there's a lot going on. I mean, in a turn, the inner wing is going a lot slower than the outer wingtip. So, they don't handle as big, as nimbly as a small 15-meter glider. But, the standard in wingspans now is, 18 and 20 meters. That's pretty common. There's, people have made them out close to 30 meters. There was a guy named Dick Butler. He built a one of a kind. It's Concordia is what he named it. It was essentially, it's a home built, and it's the most advanced sailplane in the world. And it excels in weak weather. He did the things like carbon fiber I was talking about before. He did some things with that sailplane that are just unbelievable. And fascinating what he did. But it's, that glider, I think it specs out at 70 to 1 is what he estimates the performance at. I don't think he's actually done the testing on it yet. And, I may be wrong on that, but yeah, I mean, 70 to 1. So it's, 3,000 foot tow, which is a standard, tow for gliders. I mean, you can go 50 miles on that, which is pretty cool, if there was no terrain to hit. And as far as weather, It's interesting when I listen to you guys talk about overdevelopment. I think what you're talking about are thermals that are too strong to fly in, where it starts causing problems with the wing. And in a sailplane, I've never run into a thermal that was too strong. I mean, 10, 12 knots, it's great. You're grinning ear to ear and just, going. And as far as G loads go, when you're wave flying, when you get in the rotor, you can run into, 5, 6 Gs, positive and negative. And I wouldn't make a diet of it because it's pretty frightening, but they stay together and you're really glad when you're not in that anymore. I've never had a G meter in there, but I have hit turbulence where, things in the airplane were broken. So it's, they're pretty durable.
But I mean,
so
when we talk about overdevelopment, we're just basically talking about thunderstorms, when the sky just gets way too big. And if that where, cloud suck becomes a real possibility. You actually said in one of your emails, you were talking about that how you guys used to get really tall was to play around with big, QNIMs, and then Wave came along. It didn't come along. It's been there all along, but you guys discovered how to fly it. Do I have that right? And then let's, I got to talk to you about Wave, but first, do I have that right? Is that correct?
Yeah. So in the soaring world, there's different achievements you can get that are internationally recognized. And one of them is they're known as the silver badge, the gold badge, and then you can have a gold badge with diamonds. And so, to get a diamond climb, it's a 5,000 meter climb above your low point. And before they really figured out how to use Wave, they would go up through the QNIM, and just get in them and fly up. And sometimes they'd, blow the gliders up and the guys would parachute down, but they got their diamond and, it wasn't safe. And, it's illegal as hell, so people don't do that anymore because, flying, you're going up to where there's a lot of other aircraft and things like that. And, you guys know just from flying paragliders, the big sky, little plane theory does not hold up all the time. And, but that's how they would do it. They'd wait and find these towering Q and they just go thermal right up the middle of them, and you'd read stories about, hailstorms just beating the snot out of them and breaking things. And then eventually they'd pop out the side and, and come down. And then when they discovered Wave, it was significantly safer to do that, because one, you don't want them on the clouds and you can fly Wave without clouds. So, you have really good visual flight rules, VFR, where you can see and avoid and things like that. But the big thing with Wave is you start running into airspace problems where above 18,000 feet is positive control airspace, where you're on a flight plan, you have a transponder code, which is a thing in most airplanes, which receives the radar signal and rebroadcasts it back with a bunch of information about that aircraft. So the air traffic controllers, can direct them around the sky and help them avoid each other. But the FAA is, found ways up with that. So where we do our wave flying primarily is Mount Washington, New Hampshire. And the Mount Washington Soaring Association has a standing agreement with the FAA to open up essentially it's a big cylinder up into the Class A airspace, that positive control airspace. So when the Wave is set up good, you call the air traffic controllers, you request them to open the cylinder or the Wave window. They'll open it, they'll request the height. They just, want you to respect it and stay within it. And it works out great. So you can go up there and you can do it in clear air. And it's pretty fascinating to be sitting in an unpowered airplane at the same altitude as, airliners coming in from Europe. So it's pretty cool.
So let's, we talked a little bit about Wave with Hansa. He was flying in Wave in the 2015 X Alps. And so I have to assume I was as well, because we were in a pretty similar place that day and we were really tall. I didn't even recognize it, but let's get a definition of Wave. And what needs to exist for it to set up? What does it look like? What are the visual cues? What are the forecasting cues? Before we started recording, you were talking about the highest you've been was 27 plus. And that was a day that had some airspace issues because you guys missed that in the forecast. So pretend that all your listeners have no idea what you're talking about when you say Wave and break it down for us.
Okay. What I'd recommend first is listen to the podcast with Hansa, because his description was really, really awesome. And it made a lot of sense. Essentially, if you haven't listened to it, the easiest way to describe wave is it's an obstruction in the air. Generally, it's a mountain, and it sets up the same way as when you have water going over a rock in a river. You'll see a bump and you'll get the standing wave behind it. And people in kayaks they'll sit in there and they'll surf that. And we do the same thing in the sailplane. As far as signs of it, if you're going to forecast it, what you need is a layer of unstable air that goes essentially from the surface to the height of the generator. So we'll just call Mount Washington. Since I'm familiar with it, it's 6,000 feet tall. So you've got maybe a 4,000 foot thick layer of unstable air. And then on top of that, you've got a layer of stable air. And then on top of that, what you really want is another layer of unstable air. So you'll have a stable air sandwich. And what that will do for you as the wind comes across the generating feature, it'll deflect downward, and that layer of stable air goes into the unstable air, and it doesn't like it at all. It doesn't want to be there, so it rebounds up, and that's the beginning of the wave. And what's nicer, if you have that layer of unstable air above it, it's like a hand on a basketball. It pushes it back down again, and it just goes up and down and up and down. So you get wavelengths that are behind it. You get several crests, and eventually it peters out. But you may get 7, 8, 9, wave crests, and each one is a little bit smaller than the other one, and they'll be there. It's nice because they're pretty uniformly set up. So once you find one of the crests, you can jump up to the next one, or just fly right out the front of it. But the cool thing about the wave is it's really, really stable laminar flow air. It's really smooth. It's like sitting in your couch. You almost do nothing, and you can climb like a homesick angel. That day we were talking about, I got off tow and I was climbing at 2,700 feet a minute, which was essentially airliner speed. So it was going straight up. I mean, it was just watching the ground get flat. It was
and what
really
speed
cool.
are you flying?
So normally, for the wave to set up, you generally need about 25 knots coming over the generator. And then you also need, in the forecast, you need the wind speed to stay more or less the same direction. So there's no directional changes, and also to be slightly increasing with altitude. So as you go up, so in order to climb in the wave, you need to have a ground speed of 0. So if the wind is 30 knots, you wouldn't be flying that slow. You'd actually start to surf back and forth because the stall speed on most of the gliders is around 40 knots. So you need to be going a little bit quicker than that. But as you get moving up, you'll start to speed up, and you may be flying at an indicated airspeed of 50 knots. But as you go up, there's a true airspeed, and I believe that increases about 1% per 1,000 feet. So, the airspeed indicator will say you're going 50 knots, and that's the indicator to stay in that. And then eventually, what happens is, I'm not sure if it's the same in the paragliders, but as you speed up, you're trading sync rate for speed. And at some point, the speed is so great that you overcome the ability for the lift to pick you up, and you just get stuck there. You're just not going to go any. You're not going to go any higher. If you slow down, you get blown out the back, and if you speed up, you just you essentially you don't take advantage of that lift. And it's so probably generally you're probably cruising around 70 knots, I guess, indicated when you're sitting up there, and again, it depends on what it's doing, but that's pretty typical.
What's the trim speed of a glider? What's your trim speed of a glider that's like a high end glider?
I assume the trim speed is like the best L over D, the best glide ratio. Yeah. So most of them, it's probably like around 50 knots.
Okay.
Just taking an average. So and at that, depending. Most of the modern gliders, you're probably gliding in the 40 to 45 to 1, range, and with a sync rate of, at that speed, maybe depending upon the weight, 300 to 400 feet a minute.
Okay.
That's
so when you're
pretty rough.
Are you on these days? Are you using the generator as your you're getting off tow and moving to that generator, or is it in the tail of it?
Yeah, so it's always
in other words, are you going into the windward side of it and starting to bounce up from there, pointing into it, or are you getting behind it and running with it?
Okay, so the wave is always going to set up on the leeward side of the generating feature. So, and there's a couple of ways you can get into it depending upon what the terrain is. You can tow directly into the wave. You just go up and then pull you right in and drop you off. That's the easiest way to do it. It's not sometimes maybe not the most interesting or most challenging way, but it's the best way to get introduced to it. The biggest rub with doing that is you generally end up flying through the rotor. So in that laminar flow, underneath that, under the crest, you'll see called roll clouds or cigar clouds. It's really marking turbulent air, and it's the air that gets trapped between the ground and the wave, the air generating the wave. And it's just like a big roller on a conveyor belt. It just sits there and tumbles and tumbles and tumbles, and it's super turbulent. And I think in one of the email you guys were exchanging, I was saying, yeah, it'd be really great if you get in a paraglider. You'd probably get killed getting there, just going through the rotor. And it's super violent, and it's not fun. A lot of times, the goal is to keep the tow plane in sight, much less stay behind it. And you can get huge displacements in that, where you're really just trying to keep the tow plane so you don't hit it. But when you pop out of it, like I said, it's like hitting a speed bump in a car. All of a sudden you go kabump, and it's really smooth, and you just watch the ground start falling away.
Wow.
That's the easiest way to get in. Sometimes what's happened at Mount Washington, the club's been flying there with a group of guys from the Greater Boston Soaring Club come up, and what they've done is figured out the different wave systems that's set up. So it's not like, Mount Washington's the big generator, and I'm sure like in the Sierra, they'll get all different ones, and down in the Andes where they're doing a ton of wave flying, and, they're cranking out this, I think 3,000 kilometers is the world record they've flown in wave down there. The different peaks will set up little different waves. Like if you put rocks in a different part of the river, you'll get different waves that are, near each other. So people have done to make it a little more interesting is they'll tow into a smaller wave, and they'll fly that high enough that they can then transition into the, hopefully go over the top of the rotor and transition to the larger waves that set up behind Mount Washington. And they call it an East Coast diamond, where you can make a climb to pick up a 5,000 meter climb, about 16,500 feet, and stay under the Class A airspace. And, New England is one of the few places you can do that, mostly because the ground is so low. I mean, like I was saying, Mount Washington at 6,000 feet is an unnamed foothill in most of the world. But, it's the biggest thing we've got around here, and it kicks off, a massive wave. And the guys around here have really figured out how to utilize, ridge lift and go into on a range slightly downwind of Mount Washington, the Wildcat Range. They'll ridge soar across that and then dive into the wave. The one thing you want to be careful of going from the front of the generator, though, and ridge soaring on that, is the air doesn't hit it and deflect up like ridge lift. You want that layer of stable air to be just about the same height as the generator. So what it'll do is it'll come over, and it actually bends and goes down on the back side of it. So if you're going to dive into it, you're really diving into the lee side of it, where there's a lot of downdraft, a lot of turbulence, and you can get just slapped and just get blown right out the bottom. And there's nowhere to go at Mount Washington. If it doesn't work, you better get back to Gorham Airport, or you're going to be in a world of hurt or the trees. And, so people are pretty conservative about it. So jumping over the top, I've never done it. I'm not skilled enough to do it, or brave enough, or maybe dumb enough. And that's like I'm dissing the guys who have done that, because people have. It's not in my comfort zone, So I tend to try to slide into the edge of it and avoid rotor, because it's rough.
So that's my next question is, the one kind of close experience. I've flown with tons of sailplanes, and it's always awesome. But when we were doing the Rockies Traverse with Will Gadd, there was a sailplane club, I believe near Golden, maybe we were in Vermeer, and they were talking about these monster triangles they were doing, basically over the terrain that we just flown through, and there was nowhere to land a sailplane. I mean, there was very few places we could land a paraglider, and we can come in like a helicopter. So how do you guys judge that type of stuff? Like these guys that are doing these monster flights in the Andes. So I need you to tell me about how the wave works there too. Are they like doing out and returns? Are these just one way jobs? And how are they determining that stuff, the bailouts, and when the wave drops? And because you guys can't just land anywhere. You need airports.
Yeah, or fields, that are like airports. Yeah. I think in my glider, I could probably get into a field like over a 50-foot obstacle. That's like the classic aviation thing, right? So like over the tree line, I would need probably, if I had 900 feet, I could do it, but everything better work right, So, and then at that, you're pulling the wings off and putting it back in the trailer and bringing it home. So airports are nice, but you need, good terrain to land in. And, a lot of it is those flights that those guys do down in the Andes. They're very well versed, in what's going on. Google Earth and things like that have made it really easy. But you also have to realize if they're flying along at 20,000 feet in a glider that can go, 40 or 50 to 1, they can go a long way to where they're going. And it's even when you're taking, big cross country flights around here. I mean, if you're at 6,000 feet, you can't see the places you can land. They're just out of visual range. So it's,
what do you guys fly with in terms of maps and stuff? What do you have? If you, I'm imagining like when I fly with the Super Cub pilots and stuff, they've got the book. Is that what you've got in your lap?
Yeah. So I like a paper map because it's easy, but the software now that they've developed has been fascinating because the guys I started flying gliders with were very instrumental in developing GPS flight recorders. They were one of the first people who actually did it with Cambridge Aerosystems. And these are the guys I learned to fly with. And so when I started flying gliders, these guys were talking about setting world records and chasing world championships and worrying about rules and things like that. And it was pretty neat. And one of the really interesting parts of that is you'd see the development of these flight recorders that first just came up with a screen with numbers on it and an arrow which way to go left or go right to your destination. And then now they've evolved into moving maps and all sorts of things. So what you do is you take the performance curve of the glider or the polar, you put that into the glide computer, and then the glide computer knows your airspeed and what the performance is and what your altitude is, and can essentially tell you where you can go. So if you have those waypoints or the airports punch into the computer, you can call them up and say, what can I reach? And they usually come up like that. And there's multiple different kinds now, but you can just say, where can I go? And you always keep an airport in your pocket. I mean, I'm sure paragliding is the same way. It's like you make sure you don't have just one option because it better work. And if it doesn't, you're in the trees. So the glide computers make it a lot simpler. So as you're going along, you can say, yeah, here's an airport, but as you're flying around too, you start to know where the farmers' fields are. Like I've probably landed in most of the farmers' fields around the airport here, just stretching glides and things like that and seeing if it works out. And if it doesn't, there's a field there. And after a while, you probably know the farmer on a first name basis and, go pick yourself up. So, on the long flights, it's, really, like I said, if you get up 5,000 or 6,000 feet, especially if you're that high above the terrain, I mean, you can go a long way and you just can't see where you're going to land. So you're relying on databases and maps and like everything, this too, like, a great flight, they happen once in a while, but usually you have a lot of ones that didn't work out beforehand as you learn the terrain, and that was making some of the, like the Rockies Traverse and what you guys did up in Alaska fascinating. It was like, let's just go and see what we run into, and even with some scouting ahead of time, you're still going in a little bit blind. That's like super adventurous, and I think just really cool. So it's pretty wild. They're two different worlds. I'm a little flummoxed now, actually. Like talking, I'm thinking about them. Like, wow, like that was huge stones, man, taking off to go out like that. And I'm not sure I could do that in a glider, but it's you get good at understanding what it'll do and. When you got to start looking for a place to land, I mean, there's a lot of what you do during training is just judging what the ground looks like, so your altimeter says you're at 6,000 feet. Well, if the ground's at 5,000 feet, you got 1,000 feet to figure it out, and that's like cutting the margin way too close unless, you can glide straight into an airport or something like that. And even then there's a lot of variables that you don't want to just throw in. But it's electronics and GPS have made navigating long flights a lot simpler and a lot safer. And like even with spot trackers now, and cell phones, you land, you call someone and say, yeah, I landed out. I'm in Farmer Brown's field and I'm okay. The glider's okay. And, give me a call, and even before the day, I remember landing out in days of payphones, like you'd always keep a bag of quarters in your, in your flight kit with you because you'd wander around till you found a payphone and, call somebody. It was, it definitely made it interesting.
Love it. So forecasting, you said on the day that you got the highest you've been, which was almost 28, sounded like, you guys missed that day, you said, and, you didn't see that forecasted, but do you always have oxygen? And I mean, how do you, when you missed it that day, did you just shoot for the moon and it all worked, or, and how do you forecast that kind of thing? Because you talk about, using balloon soundings at I think at a level that many of us don't.
Yeah, so looking for wave forecasts, what I really like for that, there's a lot of electronic models for thermals and things like that, but there aren't very many for wave. And what has become what my go-to is using a skew T diagram. Those soundings, they can tell you a lot because they'll. What you're really looking for is that stable air sandwich. And when you look at a skew T, it'll look like a. Remember the S's in the old KISS logo? They were like lightning bolts. You'll get like that,
Yeah.
but it looks like a Z. And so if you see that like classic KISS looking lightning bolt Z, it's probably going to be a good wave day if the winds are, they get the direction good and a slight increase with altitude. If you can pick up, a couple of knots per 1,000 feet, it's going to be just a booming day because you're not going to run into that coffin corner we were talking about before where your sink rate and speed cancel each other out and you just can't climb anymore. So like really good wave days, you'll go up like a rocket at the bottom, it'll slow down, but you'll climb like continuously at like, 2 knots, like just perpetually, and those days are great. So when you look at that skew T, you see that Z and the first break where it starts to come, it's going to start down at the bottom. It's the first line is going to move off to the right as you go up with altitude. And if that break where it turns back and goes to the left is about the same height as whatever your generator is, it's a pretty good indication you're going to have a good wave day. And then the longer that line moves back to the left is the thicker that layer of stable air is going to be. And then the break going back to the right isn't as important. It helps to have a nice, thick, unstable layer because, again, it's like a hand bouncing a basketball. It's going to push that layer back down again, and it's going to hit the floor and come back up, and you're going to push it down and see that. And then usually off on the – I'm trying to remember what these things look like now. The right-hand side, there's usually the wind with altitude also. And the nice thing, too, is you can print them out. You don't need you don't need to be able to slide around on it with a mouse or anything to see what's going on. You can just print it out and it's going to stick. The other cool thing, too, is most of the soundings, you can pick up different stations and you can build a little bit of an idea of how long the wave's going to last for. And the other thing that's really important with those is you can see where the dew point is. So you can see if you're going to have moisture or not. Because if it sounds kind of funny, but if you're at 30,000 feet, even if you jumped out, it would take you 3 minutes to hit the ground. So that's a long time to get down. And, if you're going up at a 400 feet a minute or something like that, even 500 feet a minute down sounds really fast, but from 30,000 feet, that's an hour to come down. So if the moisture comes in and closes things over, you can get trapped up on the top where you can't see the ground. You don't know how thick the cloud base is. It's illegal to fly through the clouds, and it's kind of dumb if you don't know where you're going to pop out. And GPS and things like that make that a lot safer because you know where you can go. You might have to, some of the bailouts from flying at Mount Washington are 40 miles away, and there's a good chance they're going to be in the clear. But looking at that skew T with where the moisture is gives you an idea of one, if you're going to have clouds, and two, when they're going to show up and what altitudes they're going to be at. And so after that, you look at that sounding, and then the best thing to do is just walk out and take a look, just like, what is the sky telling you? And Hansa was talking about that really well about, you'll see cloud bands forming, and generally with wave clouds, if the wave is forming, the clouds, they look like they're standing still, but they're not. They're forming at the leading edge as the air comes up into a temperature where the moisture can condense out and form a cloud. And then as it moves to the back, that air moves, those moisture droplets move through. And then as the air comes back down again, it changes the temperature once again, and the moisture goes back into solution and goes away. And so you'll get these clouds that when you look at them, when you're close to them, you can see they're really roiling. It's really cool. And then they're just moving, but from the ground, they look like they're standing still. And the most interesting thing about it, what really tips it off, is the clouds will line up perpendicular to the wind. So when you get cloud streets with cumulus clouds, you get these bands of clouds in the sky, but they're lined up parallel to the wind. And with the wave, it'll be perpendicular to it because it's trapping that moisture underneath it or dropping it out across the wind. And you just look out and see it. So you'll see clouds and also they don't move. They look like they're not moving. So you'll see this cloud just sitting in one spot. And a lot of times you'll see Q, they'll pop and they'll get trapped underneath it. But they'll also form, you get these look like cloud streets that are running perpendicular to the wind. So, when you see that, you're like, oh, pretty good indication it's a wave day. Whether it's flyable or not, it's another story. I mean, sometimes, it doesn't take much to lift a water molecule up to very high, but you need a couple 100 feet a minute to get the glider in the air. And, you'll see that. But at that point, it's like take the tow and find out. Sometimes it works great.
So you can have wave that isn't strong enough.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay.
And that might be something. And my guess is that's probably what you guys ran into in the X Alps, because if you hit, if you hit 10 knots, you'd know it. It would, and you'll get that. And that's what it sounded like. And it sounds like it was pretty localized. And I was trying to figure out what you guys were talking about, because I was dying to see that terrain to try to figure out what was going on in that. And it can be very localized, when you're in there. But when you do so now you're airborne, it looks like it's a good wave day, and you have the clouds. You'll get those lenticular clouds. The lens-shaped clouds are really smooth looking, and sometimes they're all stacked up. And I think that was the original UFO, because they're very UFO looking, and you'll get a little one on top, and they just sit there, and they're huge, and they move, and they come in and out, and they're pretty dynamic. If you just sit there and watch them, they're really, really fascinating. But what those are doing is that they're marking where the air is, and generally with the lenticular clouds, if you go to the upwind edge of it, you'll be in the rising air. And that's a place to park the glider. And sometimes you'll see, you'll be up high and you'll see holes in the cube, because as that air comes down, again, it takes that air and pushes the moisture down into a warmer layer, and it doesn't condense anymore. It goes back to a vapor, and you'll see bands cut in that. And you just, go to the downwind edge of those holes, and that's generally where you'll find the uprising air. And,
Kevin, in that video that you sent me where the guy launched quite late in the day, it was like 4:30 p.m. It was a couple minutes long, and there were really obvious stacked lenticulars kind of off in the distance. By definition, when you see lenticular, is that wave? Is that always wave?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, because they look really smooth, because that's the laminar flow air. It doesn't get a chance to tumble very much. I mean, it's absolutely smooth. It's you're probably getting more motion just now sitting in your chair wiggling around than you do in the glider. It's awesome. And that's what it is. It's just that smooth thing. Yeah. So you see those stacks, you go after them. And then if you're using them to go cross country, what you'll be doing is flying parallel to the wave. So these long flights when they're doing down anywhere, but especially in the Andes, I mean, they're flying just crosswind, and just to stay in it, to go that far, and they can go really fast. I mean, the first, when I was talking before about Rick and those guys developing all the GPS, they were helping a guy named Jim Payne, who's involved with the Perlan project, which I'd like to talk to you about too, where they just set a new world altitude record. And I think I'm going to get the speed wrong, and I apologize to Jim for getting this wrong. But I think he flew 100 kilometers at a speed of in like the 140 mile an hour range.
Whoa.
Yeah, which is over the red line of the glider. I mean, theoretically, it couldn't go that fast, but it was in laminar flow air and really smooth, and it was pretty cool. I mean, these guys are going super fast, using wave, because it just if you got 1,000 feet a minute of lift, you can fly at a speed where you're sinking at 1,000 feet a minute, which might be up near the red line of the glider, and you're just going to maintain altitude. And with the world records, and I'm not sure if it's the same as in the paraglider world, but the difference in like closed triangles and things like that, the difference in, they give you 1,000 meters to lose for free, to trade off. So, so if you can sit there and fly most of the flight and not lose anything at the end, you can just nose that thing over and burn off that 1,000 meters and pick up, quite a bit of speed, and a lot of that's due, again, because of the laminar nature of the air. I hate to fly out of the wave into, some of the turbulence on either side going that fast. It'd be probably a pretty fast, you'd be tossing your chute, I think. But it would, you can really move out on it. And that's what they do down the Andes, just cruise up and down. And the flights that they make, they're 3 legs, 3 turn points. So they'll fly out, go to some spot, turn around, come back up, do it again. They're up to 3 legs. Or 3 turn point, free distance, 3 turn point, they call it.
So it's not one way. It's not just sending it down the Andes.
No, I think they run out of continent, really. I think the first time they actually flew that,
God, that is awesome.
And I believe this is right. The first time somebody broke 2,000 K, they did it in New Zealand. Like Omarama, I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, New Zealand is really well known for wave flying. And they would start on one island, and they would fly in wave. They would jump the gap between the islands and then pick up the wave on the other side and go up and fly to the tip of the island and turn around and, and go back and forth. I think the first 2,000-kilometer flight was done down there.
Unbelievable.
And that was, yeah.
That is so awesome. So what are the height differences that they're getting in New Zealand? Because it's not super tall versus the Andes, which is super tall.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I'm not sure how high they go. And I think that's one of the interesting things with the Perlan project where, they're trying to go into stratospheric wave. And I know in Mount Washington, it's 6,000 feet tall and people have flown to, I think 33,000 feet is like the unofficial record. So what's that? Almost 5 times the height of the generator.
5 times. Okay.
Yeah. So, I don't know much about the New Zealand Alps. I'm assuming they're pretty similar to the Rockies, so 14,000 feet. And, my guess is those flights, they probably did them around the 20,000, foot range. And I don't know how far the two islands are apart, but they needed to be at an altitude.
Hardly anything. Hardly anything. You could practically cross it in a paraglider. So for you guys, it's a joke, but
oh, cool.
Wow, the channel there at the narrowest point's like, I want to say it's less than 10 miles.
Okay. And then depending upon where the mountains are that come into the channel, that's the gap from wave generator to wave generator they need to go. So, you need to be high enough that you can make that across and still get into usable wave on the other side. But it's really pretty cool. Another thing with long flights like that too is, it's cold. As you go up, you lose 3 degrees per 1,000 feet. So if you're up at 30,000 feet, it's theoretically 90 degrees colder than it is on the ground. So even a nice warm day, you're still talking, sub-zero Fahrenheit temperatures, which is cold. I mean, when I earned my diamond and flew to about 27,000, I mean, one thing I remember was sitting there and feeling the airplane vibrate. I'm thinking like, what the hell am I accumulating ice or something like that? And I realized I was cold and my hand on the stick was shaking and I was moving the ailerons and everything, making the whole airplane vibrate. I was like, well, it's probably time to come down. Just from being cold, and hypothermia and, even at above 14,000 feet, you're supposed to use oxygen, and if you're climbing at a super high rate, you have to worry about high altitude decompression sickness. You get the bend sitting in your glider, so there's a lot going on with all that.
Wait, what? Are you serious? You got to worry about the bends?
Yeah. So
that is insane.
Yeah, it's the military has done a lot of stuff with this, and it's called high altitude decompression sickness. Which is real similar to what they get in mountaineering problems, but it's the same idea as the bend. So if you're, at I think the Gorham Airport's at like 1,000 feet elevation. Let's just call it that for the sake of argument. And if you're,
are you talking about hypoxia? Am I getting the verbiage wrong? Okay.
No, I'm talking about
bend.
Okay. Nitrogen coming out of solution in your blood. It's the bend. So, if you're climbing at 2,700 feet a minute, let's just say 25 because it makes easy math. I mean, you can easily be from 1,000 feet to 20,000 feet in 8 minutes. And when you cross to 18,000 feet, roughly half the atmosphere is below you, right? So the pressure is by half. And if you jump up to 36,000 feet, 3/4 of the atmosphere is below you at that point. So with these rapid changes in elevation, you can get the equivalent of the bends. So it's
God, that hadn't even occurred to me. Of course, hypoxia had, but okay. So we got to transition then to the Perlan project. So what do they? Tell me about the math because they just broke 52,000. How do these planes differ from what you guys are flying, if anything? What are they wearing? Do they have heaters? How does that look?
So I'm not intimately familiar with Perlan, but the biggest thing that those guys did to figure out how to go really high is they fly pressurized cockpit, which is different than everything else. How they pressurize it, I don't know. But that allows them. So a couple things happen. So they started running into problems with the old world altitude record. It was set by Bob Harris, and I think it was around 49,000 feet. And when you get much above that, again, the bends is a problem, right? So you can't pop when you're going up that high, and you get all sorts of hassles with just like bubbles in your blood. They would wear spacesuits, and the hassle with the spacesuit is you can't move, and you also need something in the glider to power the spacesuit because the spacesuits are so well insulated that you'll literally cook yourself from body heat. I think we generate about 100 watts, and you have to get rid of that heat somehow. When you're in an environment that's meant to keep you free from the hazards of space, you have to put a cooling suit on to keep you cool. So now you have to put something bigger in the airplane, and once you pressurize it, you can't move. And gliders are tiny, man. It's like you wear the thing, you don't really sit in it. I'm sitting in a regular, like, comfortable chair at the moment, and I have much more room from side to side in there. And so they used to use 2-place gliders so they could put all the support equipment in the back seat, and it became a real hassle. And the guys at Perlan, it was originally Steve Fawcett was involved with it and put some money in, and they decided to go to pressurize the cockpit. And that made, now they went, again, like we were talking before with the evolution of sailplanes, they went to the pilot comfort. They figured that out, so they can spend more time at altitude. They're probably wearing masks and all that kind of stuff too, but the actual, Ben's problem, the high altitude problem, goes away with the pressurization. So it's really fascinating. And then, Airbus kicked in a bunch of money.
Let me break in real quick. When did Bob Harris do the 49,000?
Oh man, I think it was like in the 80s. I could look it up. But
so he had none of it. That was non-pressurized. He just had oxygen.
Yeah, and he was using a demand. I want to say it was a pressure breathing apparatus. This is what they fly in the military. It's the classic like A14 regulator. So in order to increase the pressure in your lungs, so you have transfer of gases, you're actually breathing under pressure. It's weird. You don't inhale. You just relax, and the system inflates for you, and then you forcibly exhale. It's really tiring. And I've only done it a couple of times just to try it out, because I have this great fantasy of going above 40,000 feet at Mount Washington, in which case you want to use that stuff. So I have some to practice with, but I haven't flown with it very much. And that's what they did. They did it out in Bishop, California, the Owens Valley, where you guys talk about flying all the time. They get unbelievable wave out there, and they did a huge project with it right after World War II, the Sierra Wave Project, and they did a lot of really cool research on that stuff. And that's where they developed a lot of the wave flying techniques and figured it out. And I mean, the wave out there was so strong. A guy was actually using a P-38, a twin-engine pursuit fighter plane from World War II. He was wave soaring it. That's how strong the lift is out there.
Holy mackerel!
Yeah, it's all documented in a book called "Exploring the Monster," which is really fascinating book to read. It's really well done. It explains a lot of this stuff, and these guys were learned a ton. And but yeah, so like all that stuff, again, when they get back to, they use all this old military stuff, and that's still what people are using. And then Perlan figured out how to go around that, and they're down flying they're trying to get up into the stratosphere. The goal is 100,000 feet, which is it would be the highest of any winged airplane flown. Like at a sustainable altitude.
God, that is just unbelievable. So how long have they been working on this?
I think about 4 or 5 years. It may even be longer. It was an interesting project.
You mentioned in the email that the logistics, the money, the what's gone into this. Can you give us just a little bit of insight there?
I'd love to, but it may not be absolutely accurate. But I know that, they've been working on it. The airplane they built is really, really unique. It's a one of a kind. I mean, and they did things to make it simple. It's got, fixed landing gear, and it's very elliptical. It's made to, and technically they need to fly in this super thick atmosphere of, whatever the elevation is, 5,000 feet to take off, and then the super thin atmosphere of 100,000 feet. I mean, it's nuts what they're working on. And I don't understand it. I wish I did, what they're doing, but it's been a huge project. They got a big influx of money from Airbus, the same guys who make airliners, and they were saying that, if you can build something more efficient, then we can help us build more efficient airliners, and they've got some of the guys who just made a living at, come flying in wave, not like an actual living, but that's like their careers are built on wave flying. And it's really, really a fascinating project. And, I wish them the best. I mean, at one point we had talked about trying to set a world altitude record, and we're talking about renting spacesuits from the Soviets and stuff like that, because that's the only place you could get them. And these guys were like, no, we're just going to get away from the spacesuit thing and figure out how to do it. And I hope they do, because I just think it's really, really cool. I have super huge envy of that. It's I'd love to be sitting in that thing doing it, but it's It is what it
Okay,
is.
so my next question is, because I don't think I've been on this much pins and needles on any of the talks we've ever had. I feel like I'm in the wrong sport. Like how you mentioned your son who's 14 is starting to learn to fly gliders. Um, what is the now that's one extreme end. Obviously, that's Steve Fawcett kind of stuff. But what for the people listening that are as excited as I am right now about flying sailplanes, give us the quick rundown on how do you go about it? How much does it cost? Obviously, as I understand, it's mostly clubs. You don't have to buy your own glider. Am I right there?
Yeah, it is. You're absolutely correct. So you can purchase your own, and there are commercial operations, and they do a great job. But most of the soaring is done through clubs, and I'm fortunate that the club I belong to is 2 miles down the road, which is awesome. There's times I'll sit on the porch and wait till I hear the tow plane, and then be like, okay, it's something going on, and then head down. Especially if I have chores to do and stuff at home, so I can figure out when they're going. But it's yeah. So my son Nathan wanted to learn how to fly, and he's been around sailplanes his whole life. And when my daughter Olivia was born, she's 16. I was racing then, and it was one time she came up on the podium with me to give the day winners talk. I'd won the day before, and my daughter was there, so I was like, "What the heck?" I brought her up on the podium with me, and gave a talk. So the kids have been around them their whole life, and and I never really pushed them to fly. If you want to come fly, great, let's go. And if you don't, that's cool too. And trying really hard not to be like a little league dad with the airplane. And but my son decided he wanted to start flying, so it's legal to solo a glider at age 14. So he's been taking lessons, and that's been really awesome. And as far as costs, again, with the clubs, most of the clubs are really reasonable to jump into to fly. A lot of them, I know my club, they have all the instruction is free. The use of the aircraft is included as part of your tuition, and then you pay for a tow. And most aero tows, it's about $50 to take a 3,000-foot tow. So like on a good day,
Okay.
you can turn that into all day, and then some days you're just taking a sled ride, and most people, there's a rough rule of thumb. They say you can usually solo within the number of flights of your age. Kids learn so much faster because they have no bad habits from driving cars and all sorts of other stuff. I'm sure it's true in the paraglider world too. But it's probably takes, if you wanted to put probably $1,500 into it, you could probably get to the point where you were flying on your own, and just and then depending upon the club you're with, it's like our club that was founded on the idea that, they're going to develop sailplane pilots and make cross-country pilots. And they encourage you to go cross-country with club equipment. Not every club does that, and you were really, really fortunate. And, and at some point after a while, they went out and they bought themselves a, higher performance glider that the club can use. So, you want to go out and do stuff. And, that was one, I'd taken that ship to, to many wave flights, and also down to Pennsylvania to go flying down there on the Appalachian Ridges, which is just ridge flying for hundreds of kilometers. And I was wondering if you could take a paraglider down there. It would be pretty awesome. And then use it to race with also. And so it's been really, really great. And then what usually generally happens is people decide they like the high performance and things like that. They handle better. The performance is cool, but the nicest thing about the highest performance is like it's glide, but that glide gives you the ability to sample a lot of air, which is, so if you have a thermal every couple of kilometers, the more kilometers you can touch, the higher the opportunity you're going to have to actually find something that works for you, and that's the cool part about it. And, they're definitely more comfortable. They're quieter. They handle better. And it's, it sounds similar to what you guys are talking about with the paraglider wings, and it's a really good activity to go and learn to fly. And the cool thing is, you learn to fly. I flew power before I flew sailplanes, and I've hardly flown a power plane since I started flying gliders 20 years ago, so it's really cool. And I definitely recommend finding a club and, go for a ride and hang out and,
Yeah, I'm coming out to visit you, man. I can't even believe it. It just sounds so awesome. Okay, back to the I wish you luck with your son Nathan. That just sounds like a blast to do together. Back to this theoretical crazy math stuff and the Perlan project. They're shooting for $100,000. You say the math works, but it's way out there kind of stuff. Do you are they going to pull it off?
I hope so. The guys who are involved in the project are really good at it. And, it's good. I think it's gonna be one of these things where, the overnight success takes 20 years. If it was that simple, they would have done it by now, and even as so, they beat the world record by 3,000 feet, and it's a record that stood for, Fawcett reset it to, I think, like 50,000 a couple of years ago, but like they're going in increments, and, I think they're gonna spend a lot of time learning how this works, and because they're going to areas that no one's ever been there before. Next time then they go to 54,000 feet, they're the first people who've been there. And so they're figuring out as they go, which is, I think, one of the most fascinating parts of the whole thing. Like they're teaching themselves how to do it, and I do think they're going to get there. I don't see why they can't. And they're going to hit one of those days like you don't get every day where you're climbing at 2,700 feet a minute over Mount Washington. And every once in a while you stumble into it and it just works great. And it's, those are the days you talk about because it's super cool. And, these guys are going to stumble into one of those days and they're going to learn, they're going to learn something. And yeah, I'd love to see them do it. And I think they're going to, and they're as it is, they're going to altitudes that are just mind blowing. It's just, airliners don't fly that high. So next time you're flying off someplace, think that you're at 2/3 of where they've been, and look at the view and everything like that. And, so yeah, they're going to do it. And also there's not a lot of meteorology of what they're looking to explore. They're really confident it exists, like, again, the math says it works, all the models and everything show it should be there. And, again, they just may run to the point where they just can't fly fast enough they're going to run into the old U2 problem. They go 2 knots forward and they're above red line. They go 2 knots slower and they're falling out of the sky,
So let's talk about that. Paragliding, we talk about accidents and the risk all the time because it's super risky. You're playing with the ground, and you're flying a kite. You mentioned, there's obviously risk in what you guys are doing in a big way, but is there, is it how many accidents are there? Are these guys that are pushing it at that level, or are they in this Perlan project? Has anybody bailed? Is anybody, are planes disintegrating? What is the risk of what they're doing and what you guys are doing?
Well, the risk is, I'm not saying it's insignificant. If it was super high, I wouldn't be doing it. I kind of like walking around. And I think it would be really selfish and unfair to orphan the kids just because I wanted to, go try something. So, putting the risk in perspective. But, it's generally general sailplane flying is, it's relatively safe. I mean, people like paragliders, people ding them up once in a while, but mostly people get hurt competing. I know more people who've died in competition than I know people who died driving cars, and that's a fact of, I stopped racing just because of that. I thought it's like, I had a couple of close calls in races and I was like, wow, that was exciting.
Why?
But
is it mid-airs? What's getting people in comps? Mid-airs. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Just, it's, a lot of times too, it probably happens in the paraglider world. People, they think it's a competition. They got to push harder. They got to do this. And they take chances and risks that they wouldn't normally take, and you talk to, and it was really interesting listening to Kriegel talk about risk and risk management, and it's like, you have to take some risk because it's going to pay off, but you don't take stupid risk, where there's like nowhere to go. And, people have mid-airs or contact with terrain. They're trying to, stay in the air. So they try scratching something out a little bit, too much. They try a little too hard. They get too slow. I mean, you guys talk about wing collapses all the time, and, the gliders, I think it's interesting listening to the guys talk about SIV and like, I tried to stall today. And it's like, we do that all the time, and not knowing what the reaction of the paraglider wing is compared to the glider. I mean, you stalls are something you practice all the time. I mean, you have to do it, and to become proficient at it, but doing it near the ground and you're going slow, I mean, you can spin the thing. And I guess that's like a wing collapse, like it just stops flying, and it takes a while to recover, and it's, and there's a lot going on. If you're low and you let's say you push too hard and you end up in a spot where there's no place to land, you got to make that stick or you're going to just be in the trees, and then people do dumb things, or they stop paying attention, or, they just get mentally overloaded and have problems. But, it's just, and then there's also contests where there's nothing, there's no incidences. There's been world championships where it's not like, guys are dying all over the place, like the old Formula One days, where it was like every wreck. So it's not like that at all. But it's, the flying around, it's actually, it's as safe as the guys who are doing it, and if you work within your limits, and you have to push your limits to get better, but you don't just take them and throw, just take reasonableness and just throw it out the window and just take stupid risks where you have no place to go. It's, it was, and I grew up flying with really good pilots, guys who had set world records and competed for world championships. And like you talk about the intermediate syndrome a lot. And I had a powered license I've been flying since I was 11 and got a powered license and did a lot of that. So I think, by the time I was old enough to get a license, I had probably a couple hundred hours of experience. And when I moved into gliders, I worked with these guys who were like super experienced. And at first I thought they were absolutely nuts. And then just talking to them, but then when I flew with them, I realized that, wow, these are some of the most conservative pilots I've ever met. They know right where the edge is. They walk right up to the edge. They hang their toes over the edge, but they know that they're still balanced, and they, and they understand what their airplane can do. They understand what they can do, and they stay well within that limit. They don't even get on that edge and teeter totter. They're like rock solid on, going in there, and they only go out to that when it's, the payoff is going to be there, but they're really conservative. They always have, I've heard multiple guys tell me, if you don't have two options, don't do it. Like you should always have a landing option and another option. And, I've been in land outs where you see a field looks great and you turn, the landing pattern, I don't know if they fly this in paragliders, but you generally take a circuit around the field more or less, so you can kind of see what it's looking at and line things up. And, you turn final to come into land, and you realize the whole field lights up because it's full of rocks. It's like, oh shit, what are you going to do? And there's another field there you can turn off. But if you didn't have the other field, you're going to damage the glider or damage yourself, and so it's, always keeping options. And like, if you're going to take the risk where it better work, you better be really sure, if you're questioning if it's a risk or not, it probably is, kind of thing. And, it's just, it's risk management, and the flying the wing is flying the wing, whether you're hanging under it or sitting in it. And it's, with 3-axis control and stuff like that, it's all putting it in perspective and deciding if it's worth it. But the wave flying thing, talking about risk there, I mean, other than the turbulence and things like that and getting caught in cloud cover, a lot of the accidents come down to just bad judgment on the pilot. They probably never should have made that flight to begin with. What's that saying? It's better to be on the ground wishing you're in the air than in the air wishing you're on the ground. And, but once, but if you make the decision to go much above 20,000 feet, you're starting to get into the area where if you have an oxygen failure, you're screwed. I mean, I forget the exact time, but like at 25,000 feet, they say your time of useful consciousness, to where you're going to essentially stop functioning, is about a minute. And when hypoxia creeps in, you don't know what's happening. So essentially you're screwed before that minute comes up. And if you get above 30,000 feet, you get down into like the 30-second thing. So you have 30 seconds to figure out what to do. So if your oxygen fails, so I always fly with the backup system, and it's good just for getting down. It does nothing. I mean, if I'm hitting that bottle, I've got, about 10 minutes to get to a breathable, survive
below 25 or something. Yeah.
And even 25, you're still rolling the dice, and cause
you're still wicked hypoxic probably.
Yeah. So you're probably operating on 3/4 capacity as it is, even with the supplemental oxygen. And then it's there. So yeah, I've got a holy shit bottle. And if it's, I need it, I'm out. And, the fastest way down is to jump. But even so, if you're at 30,000 feet, it's roughly 10,000 feet a minute in free fall, right? It'll probably, go a little faster because you're higher, the air is thinner, but you're not going to hold your breath for 2.5 minutes. You're cold, you're scared shitless, and you're jumping out of a broken airplane or a good airplane because your oxygen system failed. I mean, and then even once you're under the canopy, then what? You're in this, you're going to get sucked back up again. And, again, in that book, Exploring the Monster, they talk about the guy bailed out and he spent a bunch of time getting sucked up in the wave and then dropped out and going through the turbulence and all sorts of stuff, and
then you're a hail ball, literally.
Yeah.
just playing yo-yo in the sky.
Exactly. And it's, so, it's just, having redundancy and things like that. And the best quote I heard about high altitude wave flying, and like high altitude meaning stuff that's achievable by most sailplane pilots, is you're going cave diving. If something goes wrong, you're effed. It's just, and it's, so take those things into consideration, when you go, and, I always put hard limits on it. When the O's get down to a certain spot, I'm out, and if I'm close to an objective, then, too bad. It'll be there again. It's the waves, however long the mountains have been there, the waves been there. And, I can go back and again, and it's, it's better to be disappointed on it than dead, I guess. And, so that's I think, again, it comes down to, what you're, how prepared you are, like even, great cross-country flights, they very rarely happen. You just decide, I'm just going to go fly today. Bang, you knock out some huge flight. There's always a lot of preparation that goes into it. And, it's like, so putting those things in. So, and the other thing too, with the wave flying is cold. I mean, and dehydration, you run into hassles with that. You're sitting down on the ground and it's, 40 degrees, but if you go to 30 grand, it's going to be 90 degrees colder. So you're talking, it's going to be, 90 Fs, right? So it could be like, 30 below. So you put on, like, I wear a down mountaineering suit, a down jacket, down booties, down pants, and all sorts of stuff, and then, you're strapping yourself in and trying to drink enough water and everything like that. And then, what's physiologically for me, when I get above 18,000 feet, like my hypothalamus goes nuts and it's like, you're overhydrated, so I have to pee like crazy, which is just another like management thing, when you're sitting there, but then you're just dumping liquid. So you're becoming dehydrated, which just, affects your ability. And you couple that with some hypoxia, and suddenly you could be in a world of hurt, pretty fast if you don't set yourself some hard limits that if something doesn't seem right, if there's doubt there, if you're doubting something, it probably means that there's something not right, and it's just time to pull the plug.
If there's doubt, there is no doubt.
Yeah, exactly. And, and stuff like that.
When it's just fascinating, man. I got to stop smiling. I'm going to break my face. In paragliding, there's, what's really exciting about where we are, and I've said this a million times, sorry listeners, but there's so much unexplored. There's so many lines that haven't been flown. And, we had this huge jump in glider technology in 2009 that kind of just doubled everything. We went from a 100-mile flight being a big deal to 200 miles. Do you guys look at things in that way? So this Andes and the Perlan project is definitely on the map. That's happening. But are you kind of the same way? I mean, are you guys looking at stuff in the Himalayas and Russia and do you guys travel to? I mean, obviously traveling with a sailplane is a lot tougher, but tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so they're always looking for places to go. I mean, for a long time, the place that set world records was in the Appalachian Mountains in Pennsylvania. That whole ridge down there, and that's where people were setting records. From the 60s to the 70s and 80s, and then, when the technology changed enough that gliders are easy to move around, or easier, lighter, they could put more of them in containers, and also people started coming into money. I mean, it's expensive to go to the Andes, and most people, motor gliders became more reliable. And a lot of the stuff they're flying down in the Andes are motor gliders, because if something goes wrong, they pull the motor out and it terminates the gliding flight, but they can still get somewhere. They're not a pure glider. So as long as the thing starts, they can go over some pretty gnarly terrain, to get out of a situation or retrieve themselves, because it's not, I think we're spoiled here in the US that, there's airports everywhere and we have access to aviation that's just unprecedented. And, you land somewhere and it's not a big deal. People are always freaked out that, there's no I don't contact air traffic control and tell them where I'm going. I just go, and, so with the restrictions that they have in other areas of the world, a lot of those things were alleviated when motor gliders became, and the big thing now, like in technology, is electric propulsion. They can put these electrics in and, theoretically you don't have as much problem with like trying to start a cold soaked engine. You're sitting on your try starting your chainsaw at 30 below, and it's not that easy. So so I think as people find other places to go, and again, like what they're running out of down in the Andes, they're running out of continent. So what do? You
That
can
is so awesome.
yeah, I mean, you can extend your flight, but what are you going to do? You're just going to they're going to make the jump to North America. I mean, you can't get high enough to do that. And I'm sure there's people who want to go explore other areas of the world. I mean, to me, that would be that's one place I have great envy of guys flying paragliders is the portability. You can go check out it's like going climbing. You grab your rack and you go check out other places. And in the sailplane, you don't do that. I mean, they're in a trailer, and the trailer is 30 feet long. You need something to pull it with. You need somebody to put you in the air, and either an arrow tow or they winch launch them. And even that's rare in the U.S. That's a big method in Europe, and so to a certain extent you're limited. And that's why the advent of motor gliders is really changing things, because you can go exploring, and assuming the thing starts, doesn't.
All right, dude. So I here's what we got to do. When I was flying by Denali on the Alaska Traverse, Denali on many, many, many days was just stacked with lenticulars. And luckily we were down, 11, 12,000 feet on the lee side. And so we weren't getting, we had pretty strong tailwind, but we weren't getting any of that. But I was looking up at the, lenticulars to us means really scary day. Whereas it sounds like for you guys, it's like, yeah, game on. So I've never seen a sailplane up there. So let's let's make a plan. We could fly back and forth across that thing, 3 times in one day. It took me 37. That's just unbelievable. It's so exciting. I'm really thrilled with this. I think it's like one of these, it's like hang gliding for us. For me, it's always been, they're obviously just amazing aircraft and must be so much fun to fly. But for me, the setup and, not being able to land in tiny, tiny little places and just them, moving them around has always kept me away from them, because the paraglider you can just put on your back. But the stuff that you guys are doing, I mean, to fly these, 1,500K triangles around Europe in a single day, that's the X Alps in a day. That is awesome. Yeah, I'd be fascinated to know what you guys could do with a place like Alaska Range, because I think it's the problem there, I guess, would be, just the lack of landing. There are airstrips that, as there's dirt airstrips everywhere for all the bush plane guys, and they might be a little bit short for you guys. I don't know. You said 900 feet. That's not much. I guess you probably could stick it in, but
if the 900 feet clear in trees. If you hadn't like, it's like I've landed in fields and stuff like over rivers where you can just come buzzing right in. You can hit the ground and stop. It's because there's nothing to clear. But yeah, and then the other thing, it's got to be pretty wide too. I mean, most gliders are 15 meters,
right.
so that's like 52 feet, right? And then plus you need a little bit on either side for like the holy shit factor and stuff like that. So
right.
It's and that's like I said, keep saying like. I'll trade you, man. We'll jump in a paraglider and you can jump in the glider. We'll trade seats. But it's because like the idea of going, like when you're talking like, yeah, I'm just going to top land. I'm thinking like, how cool is that? Like, you just like, I just want to stop. And there's one of the guys in the glider club who flies paragliders. And he was saying like, he like loves going to Cape Cod, Massachusetts, because he goes, yeah, in the wintertime you can fly on the beaches because nobody's there, right? And he goes, it's like really fun. You just fly along and then you get cold, you just stop. And I was like, what do you mean you just stop? Because you just land, and then you pack your glider up and where all the stores are, and you go get a hot chocolate or something like that and hang out, and then you just, and I was like, that just sounds like an absolute blast to just doing stuff like that. And it's like, yeah, in the glider you can't. And it's like,
and that's the same thing with hang gliders. There were days in the X Alps where I had, 7 or 8 flights in a couple hours, but I never walked. I just would fly. Oh, it's not looking really good. Top land, have a quick candy bar. Oh, sky's opening up a little bit, rain's passed, fly again, top land, and in the Alps, it's ridiculous because there's a place for espresso or, there's some little thing or, it's pretty wild, but God, man, flying up that high and that fast and playing with wave, it's just got to be so. Is it really? Is there a lot of adrenaline involved? I mean, that's one of the things about paragliding is that half the time it's like I wouldn't call it peaceful. it's full on. It's hard work. You're really using your brain, and you're trying to stay alive. Is it stressful in that way, or is it all just like Cody was talking? I don't know if you heard his podcast, but he was they were flying a big line across the desert from Salt Lake one day, and he was getting up close to Cloudbase, which was like 19 grand that day, and this sailplane pilot was circling around him, and he's all iced up, and he can't see through his glasses because there's ice on him, and he's looking over and he's imagining this guy like listening to Mozart, and just cruising. I mean, if we got it just totally wrong, or is it pretty peaceful like that?
Yeah, it's pretty peaceful. Like, again, it's like everything else. You can stress yourself out, and because you can't just pop it into how big of a hole do you need chainsawed in the trees to drop a paraglider? And assuming it's not really super windy, like it's just like the day bombs out and you're just like it goes flat and you're just gonna drop in. I mean, how big of a space do you need?
Well, so yeah, I mean, so dropping in, which you can do, you can put a glider in a deep stall and literally come in, twice the size of a glider from pretty high, but it's wicked easy to spin or to lose it or to let it frontal. That's a really advanced move. So, and then you're landing under deep stall, which is coming down basically at the same speed you would under a reserve. So it's fast enough that you could definitely snap an ankle or tweak your back pretty bad. You're not going to die, but you can definitely get really hurt. But we can land, we always call it a postage stamp. We can land on a postage stamp as long as we can, if the trees aren't too tall, you can get pretty good at landing in a tiny space. By tiny, I mean, like the size of a glider, but it's vastly preferred to keep the glider flying and not have to put it into a deep stall. Deep stall is basically just, you've sucked the air out of the glider. It's still overhead. The canopy's overhead. So it's keeping you coming down slow-ish, but it's not flying. It's not flying forward. It's not inflated.
So like a comfortable landing, like nothing that like the pucker factor is pretty low. It's like, yeah, I'm just, okay, there it is. Like,
oh yeah. Like a football field is just like, for a beginner glider, is way more than enough. And for us, it's a joke. I mean, if I had like a soccer field or something, then I'm doing like monster tricks as I'm coming in.
Okay. Yeah. So like, that's like, so we always talk about like, how would you rate the fields, right? So you rate like a G-rated field, right? Like the movies. It's like, yeah, piece of cake, right? It's like an airport. And then PG is like, yeah, it was a little bit of work, but it was, it's all within the comfort factor, and then you get like the PG-13. It's like, it's all right. And then, you get to like a rated R field. It's like, you got away with it, but you didn't feel good about it. Like you felt like
right.
Like everything has to work, and then rated X, you're just going to die, and, or it's essentially the rated X field. It's a body recovery. It's like, here, they're just going to come, they're going to make it easy to find you. And, so that's the one thing that's really limiting. And, you really need like an 800-foot field. If it's really good, you can do it, but that's like, and again, a lot of things, you've never seen these things before, and like you fly over them, like, holy shit, there's a fence in it, or there's power lines going across it. It's like, now you got to like, and you don't have a choice. That's it, and it's like, you got to figure all that out. And it's, that's.
So let me do the math here then. So like 3 football fields is really, that's sketchy. That's not really right. Cause that's that's 900 feet.
Yeah. 900 feet, like again, and that's like good approach, headwind, flat field, it's not uphill, not downhill. It's not side hill or any of that kind of crap, where it's just like, that's like, that'd be great.
Alaska would be limiting. Alaska would be scary for you guys. I mean, but it wouldn't be. The thing about Alaska, the cloud base is so low typically, so it'd be one of these really special days where, but once you're up tall, once you're up, 20,000, then you, like you said, you got the whole state
right
to play with then.
Yeah. And that's what's really cool. I mean, and that's sometimes like how you screw yourself. You're like thinking like you're fat, dumb, and happy, right? You're like, oh, I'm at $8,000 and I got, 7,000 feet of space between me and the ground. I can go 60 miles, so you just sometimes you just space out. And when coming home, that's awesome. Like I've flown home from 60 miles away without even turning. You just hit a few thermals and bump them just as you go, and it's like you set the trim on the glider for 60 knots or something like that, and you just sit there and stare out the window, and just like, yeah, that's super luxurious. And I've had wave flights where the coolest wave flight I ever took is I was going for my Diamond goal, which is a 300-kilometer pre-declared task, and it doesn't have to, I decided to fly it as an FAI triangle because I wanted to try to set a record when I did a state record. And I took off early in the morning. I'm flying to my first turn point. I get over it and I hook into this thermal, and, I'm thermaling along, and all of a sudden it kind of gives me this weird, like, kabump, that same like speed bump feeling I talked about. And I was like, it felt kind of like waving. It got kind of smooth, and yeah, but I'm still climbing. What the hell? And I looked down below me and I could watch the cumulus cloud form underneath me. And I realized at that point, I'm like, holy shit, I'm in wave. So I just ran it up, and I ran it to, like, 10 or 12,000 feet. And then my next turn point was, like 80 miles to the north. And I just turned the glider and pointed it at it and just set the trim and just sat in the wave and just tooled along. And that thing that screwed me when I got to the other end is the wave. I had flown out the end of the wave and all the clouds had formed. And I was like, holy shit, I got to get below the clouds, because I figured the distance I had to go to get to turn point and get back out of the clouds, I wasn't sure if I was going to dip down into the clouds, which I didn't want to do, because at that point, one, it's illegal, but two, you have no sense of what up or down is, so it's really easy to put the glider in a really steep spiral and pull the wings off it. And so
that's the same for us. Cloud sucks.
Yeah, so I just didn't want to deal with it, So I was like, shit. So I lowered the gear, pulled the spoilers, kicked it sideways, and slid in under the clouds, but something was like, I had to wake up. I had to start flying again, because the last 45 minutes, I had a sandwich in my pocket. I was just sitting there eating, like staring out the window, like just fat, dumb, and happy. And so and then it was like, wake up, and and it turns out I made the flight and all that kind of stuff. It was really cool, but it was one of those things where it was rough. And then there's other times too where, like, you start getting low, and you're thinking, like, this isn't quite working, and then you're starting to look, maybe you didn't plan as well, or the fields that you saw from a distance turned out to be shit, when you get there, and you're just like, oh crap. And then you're scratching around trying to make something work. And, like, if you find, so normally the glider's sinking about 200 feet a minute, right? And so if you're sinking at 50 feet a minute, you're thinking, like, God, I'm bleeding slow, but I'm still going to hit the ground at some point, and just hoping it turns into, like, I think you talked about it in your flight in the Alaska range, how you just launched off some little low thing, you're over the Caribou or something, like you're sitting there doing that, and you're thinking, like,
I got my diamond that day.
Yeah, exactly.
Like 200 feet to 16 grand.
Yeah, exactly. And it was like, so it was, just sitting there looking at these things, and you're scratching around, and it's like, oh shit, and then you get all nervous, and like, and then you finally climb out, and like you're sitting there, and then, like, it's almost like when I guess it's exactly the same. Like, somebody gets hurt or something, and like you're in the moment, you're just doing everything right, and you're helping them out, and then, like, you get them to the hospital, or they go away or something, and all of a sudden you sit down and you're like, holy shit, and you start, like, shaking and freaking out, it's kind of like the same thing, like, and I've had flights where I didn't get above 3,000 feet above the ground, and it's super stressful, because you're literally flying from field to field to field to field, and it's worse when you're out, like, on a big day, and then the whole thing dries up and you're scratching your way home, and you get back, and it's like, it's super satisfying. I mean, you remember those. I mean, 50% of the flights you take, you don't remember anything about them, because they were just kind of like normal run of the mill. You remember the ones that were absolutely stunning, or there's something about them that was magical, or just great, or, like, days where everything just works, like they're super great, or the ones where you're just, like, freaked out for 80% of the flight, and it was just like, and you're glad you made it and everything like that. And you never felt like you were at risk, but it was like a lot of work. And when you get done, you're just mentally exhausted. You just want to crawl out of the glider.
We call it the alien world. When I got the record here, 5 years ago now, I guess it's 2013. It was 2013. When I landed, and it was only a 7.5 hour flight. I mean, there was a record because I was flying so much wind, so I was traveling really fast, which is very stressful on a paraglider, over big tall mountains. But when you land, you're like, you don't feel tired in the air. You feel fine and everything's working and it's all good. And then you land and you realize you're just spent. I mean, it was hard for me to even stand upright, So we, in paragliding, and I think in the hang gliders are the same, that we call it the alien world, where you land and you feel like an alien. You don't feel like you belong to planet Earth. You're happy to be on planet Earth, but you're like, whoa, my brain is not working.
Yeah, and it's amazing how tiring that is, just like how how exhausting it is when your brain is working. Because, the sailplanes, when you're in a high performance glider, I mean, you're in a semi-reclined position. If I could get one to cut the front of one off and put it in my living room to sit in to watch football games or something, that would be awesome, because they're like super comfortable, right? And they're meant to, in a 60-degree bank, you're pulling 2G. So if you're thermaling a lot, you're pulling a lot of G load for a long time. You're looking around, looking for stuff, and looking at the clouds, looking for other traffic, looking for there's times too you're climbing so slow you're drifting out of you probably had this happen. You're climbing, but you're drifting out of range to the field, your safety field, and it's like, oh shit, this better work. And it's totally. Like, and so it's, you get done, and you're just like tired. And I love that, man. Like when you get out of the thing, you just throw yourself over the rail and just lay there on the ground, and it's just like, you just want to take a nap, and it's just like, but that exhaustion is just, it's like so rewarding, and it's a blast.
I really appreciate you sharing all this knowledge. We didn't even tap a whole bunch of questions I have, but I want to be mindful of your time. It's getting very late in the East Coast. Is there anything you want to finish us off with here? Like I said, I got to stop this talk because otherwise my face is going to break.
No, the only thing I can let you know is again how much I appreciate what you guys do with Cloudbase Mayhem, because it's been fascinating for me. I don't fly paragliders, but listening to the Mayhem has made me a better pilot, because listening to all the, the world-class people you have on there, really listening to their mindset about flying, how they approach things and things, that works for me also. And, and it's been fun. I've contacted a lot of your guests, and, I called Matt Wilkes. Some of the things he was doing was really cool. And actually we're helping him out collecting data at our wave camp that we're going to hold in Mount Washington at the beginning of October. So, Matt talked to the ethics committee at his university and put this whole survey together. And I was like, we probably can get you maybe 100 samples, something like that. And he was like, awesome. So for the last couple of months, I've been working with him, putting together this, trying to, guys can try to make everything safer, and it's and make it better for me to do what I like to do, and do you help do what you like to do, and we can do all this kind of stuff. So it's been really cool. I sent I used to have a company that built clothing for glider pilots, and it was I wish I could remember her name, but she was really
Joanna DiGregoli.
Yes. God, yeah. And I sent her a note and said, hey, I got these things. I got a whole case. I got a crate of them. You want some? She's like, yeah, sure. So I sent her some pants, hoping it would help her set, bigger records and stuff like that. So she can, and stuff like that. So it's been really awesome. So yeah, the only thing I'd like to do is keep doing what you're doing, man, because it's really cool. And it's
Thanks, Kevin. So I appreciate that. Before we sign off, I want to tell the listeners. So what Kevin was just talking about is he's developed some special pants for the ladies. So our lady listeners, we know that you guys struggle with these darn diapers. It's so much harder for you, and it's harder for us. I don't know how many times I've peed in my face. You're trying to use a pee tube and that kind of things, but that's for another talk. Many people ask about that, but if you're curious about that, ladies, then reach out. I'll put you in touch with Kevin, because I think they came in pretty handy for Joanna. And then everything we've talked about, Kevin has sent me some great videos of wave flying, and I know he's got a lot more resources. Maybe we can try, Kevin, and we'll talk about this after we stop recording, but maybe we can try to bring him some really good SKUT examples so we can see the KISS. We can see the KISS lines you're talking about. But dude, thank you so much. I am definitely coming out to visit you. You presented that offer, and I was like, oh yeah, that'd be interesting. But now I'm coming. That would be amazing. I got to get my new little one up in a sailplane and blow her mind. But thank you very much. I really appreciate it. This has been a massive contribution. I can't wait to put this up. Thanks a lot.
Oh, you're very welcome, man.
I hope you enjoyed that really cool talk. My face is hurting actually after that one, from smiling from ear to ear the whole way through that one. Really cool talk with Kevin. Thanks for your time, Kevin, and thanks for sharing all that incredible knowledge. Really makes me want to get out and get into sailplane flying. My God, what those guys are doing is awesome. As always, all we ask for is $1 a show. We've been getting some great response to patreon.com/Cloudbase Mayhem. You can kind of set it and forget it there. And at certain levels, you get a t-shirt or a Cloudbase Mayhem hat or other cool stuff, check that out, or you can just do a one-time donation through PayPal. You can find all those links on cloudbasemayhem.com. And thanks for those of you who reached out to help with the social media. We're getting that going. I really appreciate that. And yeah, episode 51 and counting. We've got more great shows ahead. If you're just discovering the podcast, please go back and check out. There's been so many awesome pilots on the show. I'm not going to ramble them off here, but go back and check them out. I get emails every day about how this is making people safer and it's saving lives, and that is just way cool. So spread the word, tell your friends, put it out on social media, and say hello. Thanks very much. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.